gentlemen. Yeah. Did you ever ask yourself how a transaction feels on the Tangle? That's a bit how this group is here, because on a Tangle, everything is connected to everything. And this is actually the situation in the room right now. As we watched at 4 o'clock, we thought everything with the seating is going to be fine. But probably we have some last-minute registers, which I also want to welcome very much, but it has gotten a little bit crowded. Thank you for coming to this first IOTA Meetup in the Netherlands, where, as Dominic put it, we want to look if we can kickstart the Dutch IOTA community. What we're going to do today is first give you an introduction on IOTA. That will be done by Dominik, co-founder. But of course we ask you to bring your laptop because we want to do some tangible things here. So we're gonna actually work on a number of elements. This will be after this meetup put on our Facebook site as how-to video so that we can spread the word. And of course this is only the first meetup in a series. If there are elements you say, I want to have in the meetup, if you have any ideas, share it via the meetup site and we will look how we are going to build on it for the next meetups. My name is Jan-Peter Dominik. I work as a senior business developer for Enexis. We co-host this together with Elaat. Why are we interested in IOTA? What we want to do is to build a machine-to-machine ecosystem. So I don't know if you know the hackathon in Groningen, which will be in April 2018. We will host a track there where people can use IOTA to build a machine-to-machine ecosystem. If you're into things like that, register for the hackathon and watch this meetup because we're gonna build content-wise here what we're gonna need in hackathon. Okay, this was the shortest speech of the evening. So now I'm going to ask a very warm and enthusiastic welcome for the co-founder of IOTA, Dominik Schiener. Okay, that's also good.
All right, cool. So hello everyone. So I came from Berlin to open up this first meetup in Amsterdam, and I would really like to thank Enexis for really hosting this meetup and for also setting up this live demo, which we're going to showcase afterwards. And so my talk today will be about IOTA. I'll do like the typical spiel. It's getting a bit boring, but the big question I have is like, how many of you have not heard about IOTA before and don't really understand what it is? Okay, that's nobody. Okay, a few people. No more and more people, but I'll just give a general introduction about IOTA, and my point, or like my intention with this talk is that you guys understand what IOTA is, who we are, and where we're kind of going with this technology. So let's jump into it. And just so you know, the way that I usually give these presentations is that this is like really a meetup style, so it's interactive. So if you have any questions, you can just tell me to shut up, and I can just answer your questions. So about IOTA, perhaps we should start with the name. So IOTA is not an acronym, so it doesn't stand for Internet of Things Architecture or Internet of Things Alliance. IOTA is the 9th letter in the Greek alphabet, and it stands for the smallest possible unit. And obviously, our big vision with IOTA is always to enable those micropayments. So the name IOTA, smallest possible unit, makes a ton of sense. As a general FYI. Oh, this shit isn't working. So back in 2015, all of the founders of IOTA, so most of us have been in this blockchain space since 2010, 2011. In 2013, we developed Proof of Stake, which was implemented in NXT, which is also quite popular around here. And in 2015, I was also living together with the Ethereum guys in Switzerland, where we helped build this crypto valley, which is now kind of this ICO mecca. And so over the last few years, we've been really trying to kind of pinpoint the areas and the industries where blockchain makes a ton of sense. Right? Because we really want to focus on pragmatic use cases where the technology can show its potential. And on this quest, we kind of realized that the blockchain itself is inherently limited, especially when it comes to this new era of Internet of Things, where those small embedded machines are connected with the internet, and they start talking with each other and they start interacting and doing stuff. And so what we did then is we completely reinvent this distributed ledger. And the main invention behind IOTA is the tangle. And so the tangle goes beyond this sequential chain and is really going beyond just the blockchain itself and going beyond what has been known since then. And so we always joke that the Tang is a blockchain without the blocks and without the chain. So if we discuss semantics, the overarching term is distributed ledger technologies. Here's blockchains, and here's DAGs now. So DAG stands for directed acyclic graph. And if you wonder what the DAG looks like, this is a directed acyclic graph. So as I mentioned before, we don't have this sequential chain. It's not block after block after block, but we have this blockless architecture where one transaction references two past transactions in the history. So you've seen the live visualization of the Tango before. This is exactly what it looks like. And so the main differences of IOTA versus a blockchain are two things. The first is the architecture, no longer the sequential chain, but it's the DAG. So the second main thing is how do we achieve consensus? So the way that blockchains work is that a smaller subset of the network, namely miners or validators, they're there to confirm transactions in cycles. So every 10 minutes, for example, miners come to an agreement, they create the block, append it to the blockchain, and propagate it to the entire network, and everyone comes to an agreement what the valid block is. That's how blockchains achieve consensus. In IOTA, we no longer decouple the transaction making from the consensus. What this means is that there's no smaller subset of the network doing the validation when it's a full Tangle network, but every participant in the network also attests to and also validates transactions. So in IOTA, if you execute a transaction by the protocol, you're required to randomly select two transactions from this mesh, and you're then doing this validation. And what this validation is pretty simple. You just check if the signature is right, you check if there is no double spends, you check if it's conformed to the protocol, and if everything is right, the checklist is completed, you start referencing that transaction. And then you broadcast your transaction, and everyone in the network accepts it. And that's how it works. So it's a pretty simple concept, but that's also the beautiful thing about IOTA. Because it's so simple, it's so powerful. So everyone understood how it works roughly, or are there any questions? Yeah.
How much time does it take to look if there is no double spend?
So that's a good question. So that's the adaptation period. So so that's the adaptation period. So in blockchain, we have this concept of, by the way, this will be a bit more technical. In blockchain, we have this concept of transaction finality. And transaction finality is determined by the number of blocks that have started referencing after it. So in Bitcoin, you have to wait 6 blocks for your transaction to be fully confirmed and it no longer be reversible. In IOTA, you don't have to wait 6 blocks. You don't have to wait a static time. But instead, you have to wait until a certain number of transactions start referencing it. So this concept of transaction finality in IOTA is also very simple. So basically, let's say that I'm a merchant and I executed this transaction. And I want to now determine the confirmation status of this transaction. What I do then is I look up the most recent transactions that have happened, and I look if there's a direct or indirect path to my transaction. Because if there's a path, there's an attestation. There's someone building up the security of my transaction. And now by the number of transactions that reference my transaction, divided by the number of transactions that are not referencing it, I can start determining the validation status. So obviously, if 50 transactions reference it, there's a 50% confirmation status. If 51% reference it, there's a 51% security of the transaction. So obviously, after a certain period of time, everyone in the network will have the same state. Everyone will have the same transactions, and after that, it's fully confirmed. And that's the adaptation period. Yeah. By the way, this stupid clicker is not working. But I'll just do it like that. So what do we gain out of this? So the main beauty of the Tang is because we don't have any miners, we don't have that much drama from the inside, but we have some drama from the outside. And we don't need to subsidize those miners, obviously. And what we can do then is we can really execute a transaction, don't pay any fees. So in IOTA, if I send 1 cent, the other party receives 1 cent. And that's truly powerful, especially for the Internet of Things. Because obviously in the Internet of Things, it's all about micropayments. I'm not even going to send 1 cent. I'm going to send per kilowatt that I'm charging, or per computational cycle that I'm executing and stuff like that. And anything that has to do with the business model is obviously truly empowered through that. Because now you have this determinism. You know exactly how much you're going to get and how much you're going to send. And obviously the main argument of IOTA is that it's scalable. So it's the beautiful thing about IOTA is that it scales horizontally. What this means is that the more network participants that we have that are executing transactions, the faster the transactions get confirmed, the faster we reach this transaction finality. So in IOTA right now, we're kind of in this stage where it sometimes takes between 1 to 10 minutes for transactions to be confirmed. In the future, this will probably reduce to a few seconds because it's this global network confirming transactions in real time with thousands of transactions per second. Just so you know, the way that the stage we're in right now is we have this coordinated environment where the coordinator is protecting the network while it's growing and it's becoming self-sustainable. And in this coordinated environment, the scalability is limited to about 1,000 transactions per second right now. But I'm going to talk about that afterwards. So the really interesting thing about IOTA is that it's the first distributed ledger, permissionless, that you can use without a token. So if you want to use Bitcoin, if you want to use Ethereum, you need to have a token. In IOTA, because a transaction can contain either value when you do those machine-to-machine payments, or it can also not contain value. And if it doesn't contain value, it's really beautiful for data security. So this concept of data integrity, where you input a data set into the ledger, make it immutable, IOTA is the perfect ledger for that, which is why we're doing so much with Internet of Things security nowadays, powered by IOTA. So who are we? I nearly missed my flight today submitting some fucking paper documents. So I was like, I'm going to talk about the foundation. So today I submitted the last paper documents about the foundation. So hopefully soon it will be official. Sorry? Oh yeah. Just so you know, like it was an 11-month process, and you know me, so I hate paper documents. Every time I have to fill it out, I was like, fuck. But now it's finally done, hopefully. So what we've done today is we've submitted the final documents, and we're setting up this non-profit foundation in Germany. So unlike everyone else, we were the first ones to do this in Germany and go through the painful process of convincing German bureaucrats. And so basically what the IOTA Foundation is there for, it's two things. For one, the main thing that we really want to do with the foundation is to do development, because when it comes to experts on distributed ledgers and cryptography and stuff like that, there's very few. And we want, and the IOTA Foundation is there to hire these experts and to really get them on board to start building new protocols. So we started out with IOTA, which is this transaction settlement protocol. Then we're building oracles. Then we're building identity of things and all of these other things. All of these other protocols under the IOTA Foundation. So everything is open source and it's also free to use. So that's the first part of the IOTA Foundation, but the much more important part about the foundation is really this ecosystem development. So let me first actually dive into what we're doing on the development side before I talk about ecosystems. So when it comes to development, we really do four things. For one, we do a lot of research. For example, you've recently seen our research on private transactions on IOTA, where we're now going to publish a tumbling service. So you have anonymous transactions on IOTA. That is part of our work on research. We also just recently hired 5 cryptographers to work on a new infamous hash function. And we're also doing a lot of research on new modules that are going to be built on top of IOTA. So that's the first part. And the second part is obviously this development that I was just talking about, by really hiring those developers to also set up standard practices. You know, the biggest problem when it comes to these blockchains, none of them are enterprise ready. And the IOTA Foundation is really there to make the IOTA software, the IOTA core, and the protocol itself enterprise ready. Because at the end of the day, we're all getting sick of those proof of concepts. And we really want to see production ready applications that are also making money, right? Education and promotion is also really, really crucial. So we're setting aside a larger budget to really help also educate kids when it comes to the Internet of Things and also blockchain in general, not just about IOTA. Because at the end of the day, we are non-profit. And our biggest interest is not just to grow IOTA, but it's to grow this entire ecosystem, this entire space. So it's not just about DAG maximalism or blockchain maximalism. It's really just how can we together build towards a better future, right? And research, education and promotion is really crucial in that. And the last thing that we're really focused on is standardization. So standardizing the protocol, and we're setting up some really good partnerships with that to really set it in stone and through that make it production ready. And the really important thing about the IOTA Foundation is fostering permissionless ecosystems. Because I can tell you, I was also one of those entrepreneurs that was empowered by Bitcoin. Because when I was 16, I had to pay my developers, right? And you couldn't open a PayPal account because you're too young. And Bitcoin empowered you because Bitcoin, it's permissionless. Anyone can participate. And so these permissionless ecosystems are really the future. And with the IOTA Foundation, we really want to create those permissionless ecosystems where anyone can participate and start contributing, which is why we are bringing together all of these big corporates, these big governments, to start working together and start sharing and collaborating. And that's really the future of the foundation, really bringing all of these different stakeholders together to build towards one ecosystem. So I think this is less interesting, but I can maybe like quickly mention. So we recently announced our partnership with the Bosch Connectory, which is in Chicago. And what we're doing there is we're having a showcase where people from the local Chicago ecosystem can start building stuff. And then we're going to present it at the Connectory, where Bosch clients, where Bosch itself and us are going to participate to promote these products. Because our big interest is really to have an environment where any developer can just build something and we give them the platform to showcase it. And that's what we're doing in Chicago, and we're going to set up similar partnerships also in Asia, doing the same thing. So just so you guys know how the foundation is actually funded. So right now the foundation holds nearly, I think like $80 million in funding in tokens. So the main funding is always from the main holdings that we got from the donations from the users. So that's about $61 million right now. The other one is the ecosystem fund, which I'm going to talk about in the end again, which is about $10 million. And then the unclaimed funds, which is about $8 million. So we have quite some firepower, but obviously we didn't do a $230 million ICO. But it's good stuff. And for many of you that don't know, we weren't able to use any of that money so far. And now that the foundation is registered, we can finally start doing some cool stuff, even cooler stuff. So right now we have 30 people that are working on IOTA. We have offices in Berlin, also in Chicago, and we're setting one up in Asia, probably Shanghai, but we're thinking about it. So our vision, so this also goes to our understanding of the Internet of Things, because many of you know Internet of Things is the same buzzword as blockchain. Nobody really knows what they're talking about. It's just a bunch of consultants sometimes come together talking about the big vision, but there's still a lot to do on the pragmatic execution. So when it comes to the machine economy and Internet of Things of us, in our vision, it's really not about cloud computing, but it's all about fog and miscomputing. So basically, you start making the decisions and you start sharing resources all locally in real time. And the beautiful thing that you get out of this machine-to-machine interactions is that now machines cannot just share data. They can also start sharing resources. So one machine that has an excess resource like computation, bandwidth, or electricity is able to sell this resource to another machine on demand. And you obviously only pay per resource unit that you're utilizing. You make a micropayment. It's not going to be subscription services. And that's really our big vision for the Internet of Things, to have this bottom-up emerging machine economy coming out of it, without any humans. Just kidding. Everyone was kind of scared for a moment, right? Like, what's he talking about, killing all of us? We always call this going towards smart decentralization. So it's, like I said, it's not about cloud computing, but it's about fog computing and making those decisions locally in real time. So there's a really good analogy in nature. Let's look at ants. So ants, it's a single actor is rather dumb, right? They can't sense and feel the entire environment. They don't have the processing power to be intelligent enough to figure out, hey, like, should I go there or should I not go there? They just hit a wall. And as such, a single ant is really stupid. It can't really do much. But the beautiful thing is that the collective of ants, when they come together, they start sharing data. So via pheromones, ants are constantly sharing data, and in these pheromone streams, you can basically start figuring out, like, hey, there is food and there's threat. The main reason why that is the case is because ants collaborate, because they're constantly sharing data peer-to-peer, end-to-end. And that's the same thing with the Internet of Things, where we have those single machines, which on their own are rather dumb, right? They can't really sense and feel what is beyond that light post, because the visioning just goes that far. And as such, a single IoT device, a single machine is not going to be IoT. Instead, this collective, the network itself, is really going to be this Internet of Things environment where we can really start making smart decisions, and we are going to have this bottom-up intelligence, where those machines, no matter what machine they are, they start collaborating with each other. And obviously, we need a distributed ledger as the backbone to enable and foster this collaboration. And that's IOTA. So this is less interesting. So some pragmatic stuff that we've been working on over the last few weeks. So the interesting thing about IOTA is that the core is very simple. So it's just there to do this transactional settlement. But what we're building on top of IOTA is these different modules that really enable new applications to be built. So one of the first modules that we just recently launched is Flash. So Flash is our answer to payment channels. So what payment channels basically are is instead of making the transactions on the tangle itself, you make the transaction bidirectionally between two parties. And all that you do is you're signing the transaction, you're signing the latest state, and only when you want to finish and close the channel, you go on the tangle, you make a single transaction, and through that, all of those transactions that just happened get settled. And there's some obviously very powerful use cases deriving from that. This was just a use case example that you can also try out yourself, by the way, if you have friends. And so what you can do here is you can just start paying each other.
If one of those parties doesn't settle and the other does, still gets settled?
Exactly. So there, what you can do there is one party can just settle the latest state. You don't need both parties to settle. Only one of them can settle. Yeah. And the really powerful use case of this is obviously anything that has to do with two machines transacting with each other for a duration. So for example, this charging station would really benefit from this protocol where now the machine is using Flash, the car is using Flash, the EV charging station is using Flash, and through that they can enable this payment instantaneous between each other. And we're already working on some of those implementations right now. So if you want to use Flash, Flash can be used right now, and I think the documentation is not that bad. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can. It's basically a multi-sig then, so you can do multi-party payments as well. It's fairly cool. And another thing that we've been really working on is mass authenticated messaging. And in my opinion, MAM is probably the most powerful protocol that we are building on top of IOTA. So what it basically is, it's an authenticated and encrypted data stream. So via a sensor, you can constantly emit data in this encrypted data stream. And the powerful thing that you get out of that, you get this data integrity. So you know that the data that was input can never be tampered with as well. And you get this data authenticity. You know exactly which sensor input that data. So for example, we are using this today with Volkswagen and some other OEMs where we're securing the data inside the vehicle itself and making it tamper-proof. Good example is odometer data. Now we can no longer change the state, you can no longer change what the latest odometer data was. We have this full audit log. Another really, really good example is supply chain. So in my opinion, IOTA is definitely also going to play a huge, huge role in supply chain tracking. Because what we can do now is we have a tiny beacon device, and it's just constantly securing the current GPS coordinates, temperature, humidity, or like even events like who processed the package and so on and so forth in this audit trail. And this audit trail can now be easily shared with the port authorities, with the shipping line, with the bank, and so on and so forth. And in my opinion, it's a very powerful concept. And you can do some really cool stuff with it by giving selective access to only certain parties, and nobody else, just selective parties can read it. And that's quite good. And like I mentioned before, we just recently announced a private transactions on IOTA. So probably within 2 to 3 weeks, we're going to have this tumbling service. And then you can have anonymous transactions happening on IOTA without anyone figuring out the payments that you've made. And that's quite interesting. Don't do anything illegal with that. The main thing that we've been really working on is those simulations. Because obviously right now we have this coordinated environment and we want to showcase to the community and to all of those interested parties what a full Tangle environment actually looks like, and that is also secure, obviously. And so what we've been working on is a simulation environment, so complete framework, where we're simulating some of those different network environments, conditions, topologies, but also some of the attacks from the white paper. And I can actually show you guys some examples of the simulations that we've been doing over the last few, oh shit, that's a phone, over the last few weeks. So this is an example where we're simulating basically this mesh network. So the main assumption of IOTA is obviously that we mimic this IT environment. And here we're basically simulating how those different mesh networks are connected with each other. So red stream basically means that this mesh is connected to the other mesh and it has a bad connection. As you probably know, network propagation is really crucial when it comes to distributed ledgers, because at the end of the day, it's a peer-to-peer network. And we are simulating here how a bad network connectivity has an effect on the transaction confirmations. And what you can see here then is this full tangle of all the transactions being confirmed between each other. And we're also able to simulate transaction finality, meaning how fast do those transactions get confirmed, how long does it take for them to reach the end of the adaptation period, and so on and so forth. And this simulation framework will be published also by the end of November. So you can then also try out this on your local computer. Probably need a powerful computer. We have access to 2 supercomputers, so that's quite good. But you should definitely try it out. It's quite fun. Yeah. And we're doing a lot more of these simulations, also focused on some of these attacks. So if you're a hardcore researcher and IOTA hater, I think that's a perfect opportunity to work together, because obviously we want to showcase like how IOTA is really protect against those attacks. And you probably can see how IOTA, the main concept that we really drive is this self-organization one. So you have these self-organizing systems. We have those aunts where the network really is self-organizing. We have IT where this mesh, this collective is also self-organizing. It's also the same with the Tangle, where the Tangle is being able to counter some of those attacks. And that's really the core gist of IOTA. And so now as a last point, I want to point out to the ecosystem fund. So as you probably know, we are getting more and more active, proactive in really driving this whole ecosystem thing. So it's not just about us doing all of the work, but it's really about having this collaborative environment where anyone can participate. So we announced the ecosystem fund a few months ago, which is about $10 million right now. And we're doing a revamp of it, doing it in a more open manner. So if you're really interested in just building some proof of concepts, or if you're interested in promoting IOTA, I can definitely encourage you to reach out to us and apply to this ecosystem fund. Because we really want to distribute those funds, and it's a perfect opportunity for you to be able to participate in an incentivized way. And yeah, so overall, I think that was the general presentation. So I want to leave it open if you guys have any questions. Else, we can just go over to the next presentation. How do you want to do it? Are there any questions, actually?
Will there be a question section all the way at the end again? Or is this the only opportunity to ask you a question?
I think it's the best if you have questions for Dominic that you ask right now.
Right, just shoot.
All right, so let's start with saying that I'm actually I'm really fond of IOTA, and I'm a fan, but I do have 2 critical questions which I just need to ask in order for me to understand and trust IOTA a little bit more. So sorry for starting with critical questions, but question 1 is, during the ICO, do you have a little bit of history about how that happened? So the market cap is about 1 billion euros. So where did that money go? And the initial, who's holding the biggest amount of IOTA? Are the initial investors? How many IOTA are held by the development team? So those questions are my first critical question. So ICO, history.
Right. Yeah, I can answer them. So as many of you know, we did a very small ICO. And we raised about $500,000 back in 2015 when ICOs were not that popular. So we raised $500,000 back then, and the main reason for that was 2 things. For one, I'm a firm believer that when it comes to this whole concept of crowd equity funding, that you have to be very careful who you get involved. Because the main thing is obviously, if you get too many people involved, you have a bad situation like Tesos. Everyone invested $230 million in an experiment, and that's just stupid, right? And which is why we said, like if we want to do an ICO, we're not going to go insanely promote it. Like, for example, what everyone else does, you have those signature campaigns on Bitcoin Talk and so on and so forth, where you get paid to promote something. And I don't think that that's an honest way to approach these experiments. And like you can probably guess, back then in 2015, IOTA was nothing more than a white paper. So those investing took a huge risk, and we understand it. And I personally don't want to expose those new investors that just entered the space to these huge risks, which is why we didn't hugely promote the ICO. And the other thing about what happened with the ICO money, we got about 300K of that 500K. The other stuff went to VAT taxes. And those 300K were obviously used for Gin development. So Gin is our hardware startup, and also for IOTA development. And as you can guess, 300K with the 30 people team over 2 years, that's gone. Yeah. And I personally had to invest a lot of money to keep the project alive, but that's another point.
So just to summarize, like the staff, what percentage of IOTA combined do they own?
100%. So when we did the ICO, those investors got 100%. That's one of the main differences also of our ICO versus others. So us as founders, us as the foundation didn't get any tokens. We had to invest ourselves to get those tokens. And when it came to the foundation, we came to the community and said, like, hey, if you want to get the foundation, you have to donate. And the foundation came together and donated about 5% of the total supply. That's how the foundation was created. But we issued 100%. Ethereum, 17% came to the founders and to the foundation. And IOTA 0.
Okay. Okay, so, and then if everyone's okay with that, the second question? Sorry?
Maybe if you look at somebody else.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I just have a second question at the end.
Yeah, I got a question for the addresses, the receiving addresses. When it's okay to send IOTAs to an address, and as long as you have not spent any of that amount, it's still okay.
Yeah.
Why did you choose that system? What is it? Is it quantum related?
Exactly.
Exactly. So just an FYI for everyone, IOTA doesn't use elliptic curves. The reason for that is two things. One, elliptic curves are computationally very expensive, so IoT, they're quite bad. And the second reason is because elliptic curves are not quantum immune. And so what we then use is Winternet signatures, and Winternet signatures are hash-based signatures. And what the main advantage that you get out of that is computationally less expensive, and is also supposed to be quantum secure, one of the few schemes. The major disadvantage there is that you cannot reuse your keys. So if you spend from a single address multiple times, someone is able to forge the signature because you're exposing data. And that is why in IOTA you're supposed to not reuse an address after it's been spent from the first time. And after 5 key reuses, someone with a normal computer can crack the signature. But just so you know, in Bitcoin and in all other blockchains, you're also not supposed to reuse your key, because if you reuse it continuously, it also leaks data, where someone can forge it. Yeah. But we're quite futuristic when it comes to the protocol, which is why we chose Internet signature. Which is why sometimes it can be a bit painful right now to use. It's not that user-friendly.
I can, for example, imagine that there's like some donation address on the website where you want to send IOTAs to.
Yeah.
But after every snapshot or whatever, a new version, this address will have to change. Right?
You know, everyone always complains about the GUI wallet and that you have to regenerate those addresses. That's a security risk. It's not because we are assholes or something. And I don't want to torture you, right? So exactly because of that, you have to regenerate those addresses to get to the latest state. Because of a snapshot, you don't know what the latest state is. And the main reason for that in the GUI wallet is because the GUI wallet is stateless. So it derives the latest address state, the used addresses from the tangle itself. And the new GUI wallet that is going to be ready within 2 weeks, that has a state. So locally it stores the state, it stores the addresses which were used, and so on and so forth. So through that we're able to save it. Yeah. Will there also be some? Yeah, I think you can develop this as a module on top of IOTA. So kind of like a name service, right? I think that would be very powerful and very cool, actually. You should do it. Take it as a challenge.
With the last upgrade, like there was like a bit of a Twitter war on whether like
Oh yeah.
the server thingy,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
server was down and no one could transact. How do you see this like developing in the future?
Right. So that's the main thing that I've also mentioned. Right now we use this coordinator, and the coordinator is there to tell the network which transactions to validate, and our power in the system is that we can tell the coordinator when to stop issuing those milestones. And like was the case in this event, we had to stop the coordinator from an attack further disrupting the network. And as I've shown before, I showed those simulations. So right now we're really working on those simulations to first showcase what the full Tangle environment actually looks like, and secondly, when can we turn it off? And the next iteration of the coordinator will be an oracle, and after that we're going to shut it off. But to be honest, we don't know really when to shut it off, and right now the best intention for us and for the whole network is to continue running it. So like in rootstock, you're going to have merged mining. And it's also kind of like a multi-sig just doing that.
Question about these snapshots, and what is the current status of the permanodes? Is there any info about it?
So permanodes is mostly just a concept because we're too busy doing other stuff. Total honesty, right? But permanodes can be easily implemented. We've already given out an example. If you look at Ellen's work on GitHub, where you can look up the entire history from a previous snapshot. And permanence is a super simple concept. We're actually going to work with the guys from BigChainDB on that as well. So you can host a permanode by BigChainDB cluster. And what was the snapshot question actually? How can you go back in history? Oh, okay. Yeah, the beautiful thing about snapshots in the future is that we're going to do Merkle trees. So then you can really restore, have the full validation of the previous snapshot in the current snapshot. And it's pretty simple. Then you can also have this full data integrity of data that you're securing in the Tangle.
Actually, I had the same question. Just to add on top of that, what does that mean for data storage in the Tangle? Because I have huge use cases that I would want to do with IOTA, I'm totally in love. But that data storage question is always bugging me. So I want to, push data into the Tangle, but I want to keep it there. But I can imagine when this explodes, because it's going to explode, it's going to get so big that a permanent is going to get very, very expensive as well.
Permanode is a very small subset of the network, and you can host your own permanode, right? And someone else can then validate it through that. So, yeah, exactly. What the fuck? Yeah. No, exactly. So the beautiful thing about permanodes is going to be a very small subset of the network that stores the entire history. And what you can then do is you can query those permanodes in a cluster. So you query those permanodes, this permanode cluster, and you give them a tiny micropayment. So the way those permanodes are incentivized is via pay-per-query. So every time you query this database, they get paid for it. And through that, you also start balancing out the costs for it. But the way that we envision it is that companies in the future are going to host a few permanodes internally, but all of their IT devices out in the field, they're going to be light nodes. You don't need to have everyone store the network, the state. Yeah?
What's your vision on IOTA in combination with smart contracts?
Yeah, so there's a lot of interoperability happening there. And so what we are really interested in is also to have this interoperability with Hyperledger that we're working on. And also Ethereum. And smart contracts are obviously crucial for the Internet of Things, because Internet of Things needs three things: data security, machine-to-machine payments, and this automation of processes. So smart contracts are definitely on our roadmap going forward, this interoperability.
Which Hyperledger?
The Hyperledger, the main.
Which one?
A Fabric.
Fabric.
Yeah.
And when will IOTA be enterprise ready?
That's the main thing that we're working on right now. So we've worked on a complete new architecture of the IOTA core. So it's no longer ERI, a reference implementation, but it will be just a data broker itself, and you can start installing those different modules that you want. And through that, we're pushing it towards this enterprise play. And the other way that we're pushing towards it is with more partnerships, also with some known foundations. And so when? Hopefully in 2018. Obviously, how do you define production ready? And in my opinion, production ready is definitely also when those machines here have a full node running on it without someone complaining that it's down constantly.
What is the main reason to propagate the flash channels at this moment? Because the more flash channels you have, the less transactions you have on the main Tangle, and the less security you have, ultimately. I can understand on longer term that.
So why do you want to use flash channels? Because you're no longer bound to the confirmation times on the main Tangle, but you can instantly confirm those transactions. So if you're out on the feed, you have not that much network connectivity, and you just want to instantly transact with each other in an offline environment, flash channels are beautiful. And you're not propagating the transaction to the entire network, you're just signing it between each other.
Yeah, but for now, you want to have as much as possible transactions on the Tangle for the security. So I fully understand that the flash channels will be worth in the future, but not now.
Right. So even now, flash channels are worth. So IOTA's general purpose. Flash channels are ad hoc solutions for very specific use cases. Like for this use case here, using flash channels makes a lot of sense. So it would make sense for us to say, like, we're not going to develop something just because we want you to do all transactions on the Tangle. But with this diversity of product offering, we can start onboarding more companies. And that's our intention with flash channels. The IOTA future does not depend on this ternary processor. But IOTA comes out of this hardware startup where we're developing a ternary processor. And our big vision with IOTA is also to have dedicated hardware, because you need to have this dedicated hardware to execute those algorithms a lot faster, and through that you get this massive scalable network. And Gin is one solution for these dedicated hardware, but we also work on FPGAs. But Gin is definitely a work in progress, and we're going to have some cool stuff coming out of that very soon as well. But IOTA does not depend on Gin.
Hi, I'm Milko. You showed in the early stage some slide about conversions in IOTA. Can you tell a little bit more about that?
What do you mean conversions?
There was a slide with the IOTA logo and conversions inside it in the beginning. I was wondering what that was about.
Was it this one?
With the blue and the green.
But convergence. The main thing is always this convergence of distributed ledgers and the Internet of Things. That is why we built IOTA, because it makes a ton of sense to have a distributed ledger for payments, for data security, and for the automation. And because of this convergence of distributed ledgers and IoT, we built IOTA. So we built IOTA out of necessity because we saw this problem. Like, how do machines pay each other? And that's why we did IOTA. Yeah.
How do we make the payments easy for us, so to say? Because, well, if I have a car and I have IOTA in it or something, how do I actually pay? Because IOTAs are currently exchanged on...
The whole vision is that those machines pay for you, right? And so we're doing a lot with... Yeah, of course. So that what you can do then is you can just, so that also depends on the use case itself, on the application. But what you could do is you can simply plug in your phone, your car gets access to your phone's wallet, and through that it automatically pays. That's how it's going to work most likely in the future. But the way that kind of this whole machine economy plays out is that you don't own a car, the car earns money, and you pay the car for doing stuff, and the car then pays for other stuff. That's kind of how it plays out. So everyone has their own wallet, is their own economic agent, and through that you get this interactive economy. One more question.
In the future, will people know that IOTA exists? Or is it a very deep layer protocol and there's a lot of things on top of it?
So IOTA is definitely a protocol, and in the future, most likely people don't even know that they're paying with IOTA, right? But we're still trying to figure out, like, really, how does this whole cryptocurrency stuff play its role when it comes to these emerging ecosystems? Because also the thing is, this volatility is putting off machines right now. And so we need to find a solution to have this onboarding and offboarding where machines have a fiat balance. They sell this fiat balance to IOTA tokens immediately and then do the transaction between those machines. This is how we envision this short-term interim period. But the way that we envision the long-term is that machines definitely pay each other with IOTA tokens. Then we have this machine economy. But it takes time to progress there. And we don't expect to have that soon. Sorry?
There will be some centralization to determine what the value of an IOTA is.
It's a market. So it's not centralization, it's the open market that decides on it. We just need to have this liquidity.
So there needs to be more conversion points where you convert fiat to...
Exactly. So we are really focused on that. It was kind of the main problem also recently, because of this lack of liquidity, lack of markets. But it's on our radar to get that sorted out and to really have a fiat bridge so we can exchange US dollars, euros into tokens. But I think that's about it. So I'm going to open the floor for Harm.
We're going to have a small break first.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right.